Russia just told Lithuania it's coming. So Lithuania and Estonia called Ukraine. 3 Russian border guards crossed onto Estonian territory near the Narva River this month. They stayed around 20 minutes. Estonia's interior minister said it was too early to call it accidental versus deliberate. Well, that too early line is the whole point. Russia wants every incident to live inside of a gray zone long enough to see how you react. If you hesitate, they learn. If you overreact, they get propaganda. Estonia's answer to that has been blunt. Cross the border without insignia and you get treated as an armed intruder. Full stop. As in, little green men get shot on sight. No debate about uniforms. No 3-day argument about legal definitions while a fait accompli hardens on the ground. Lithuania just got handed a different version of the same problem, and it picked an equally sharp answer. On July 15th, Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda, somebody from Lithuania is going to have to correct my pronunciation in the comments. Nausėda said his country has intelligence that Russia is planning attacks on infrastructure. Not troops crossing a river this time. Energy grids, transport systems, the physical wiring that keeps a modern country running. Well, Latvia's president said the same thing on the same day, standing next to him. And here's what almost nobody covering that story followed up on. 2 months before that warning went public, Lithuania signed a drone cooperation deal with Ukraine covering co-production, technology transfer, and joint manufacturing of long-range strike, interceptor, and bomber drones. Lithuania didn't wait to find out if the warning was real before building the answer. It had already started. Hey friends, Wes here, defense journalist, Army and Air Force veteran, and today we're covering Lithuania's infrastructure warning, why Russia's preferred move here isn't invasion, and why the country building Lithuania's answer to that threat is the one that's been fighting Russia directly for over 4 years. What's wrong, buddy? Your little gray zone's not gonna work anymore? I'm sorry, it's okay. This can end anytime you want. All you gotta do is get the out of Ukraine. I have a feeling after the Wildberry strike, you're gonna get overthrown pretty soon. Just a prediction. You can resign before that happens and go into exile. All right, let's get that. Here's the assumption most of the coverage is working from, and it's the wrong one. The instinct is to read Russia is planning attacks and picture tanks at the border or invasion, something that looks like February 2022 with different geography. That's not what this is, and it actually undersells how serious it is. Russia doesn't need armor to test NATO's Article 5 reflexes. It needs ambiguity. A sabotage strike on a substation, a drone incident with no clear origin, a border provocation that's deniable right up until it isn't. Something cheap, plausible, and specifically engineered to force NATO into a decision loop without ever presenting the clean textbook trigger for collective defense. Lithuania knows that, and Lithuania's answer isn't a defensive crouch. It's a supply chain deal with the one country in Europe that spent 4 years learning exactly how Russia runs this playbook. Nausėda told Lithuania's BNS news agency on July 15th that Lithuanian intelligence has signals indicating Russia is planning what he specifically called limited kinetic operations, likely targeting critical infrastructure. He was direct about the gap in the intelligence. No confirmed location, no confirmed timing. He said, "We only know about the planning or the goal." At a joint press conference the same day, Latvian President Edgars Rinkevics stood next to him and delivered the sharper strategic framing. Even without a total Ukrainian victory, he said Russia may indirectly test Article 5 and NATO's response mechanisms. The next 12 months, in his words, will be crucial for Baltic security. Nausėda specifically flagged energy and transport infrastructure, including facilities supporting Lithuania's synchronization with the continental European electricity grid. That's not incidental. Lithuania completed its desynchronization from the old Soviet-era power grid and integration into the European system only recently. And it represents exactly the kind of strategically symbolic, physically vulnerable target that fits Russia's preferred playbook. Hits something that hurts, and that also reminds a country that it was once tied to Moscow's infrastructure. Well, the Kremlin's response was exactly what you'd expect. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov called it a fresh batch of scare stories designed to justify NATO militarization, which notably is the same response Moscow gives whether the warning is accurate or not. So it tells you nothing either way. Geography explains why this warning landed on Vilnius specifically. Lithuania borders Kaliningrad, Russia's heavily militarized Baltic exclave, and Belarus, Moscow's compliant junior partner. It sits inside the critical Baltic security corridor, alongside Latvia, Estonia, and Poland, which means pressure on Lithuanian infrastructure carries immediate implications for the entire alliance, not just one country's internal security. And this warning isn't arriving in a vacuum. The region has already absorbed a string of incidents that make the infrastructure warning read as escalation rather than speculation. In mid-May, Latvia's prime minister resigned over her government's handling of stray drones, suspected to have drifted from Ukrainian airspace, repeatedly crossing into Latvian territory. In late May, Lithuanians in Vilnius were photographed sheltering in underground parking garages, the first time that's happened in a NATO and EU capital, as authorities warned of unidentified drone activity overhead. A recent International Institute for Strategic Studies report assessed that Russia likely used Shadow Fleet vessels to launch drones over Europe, repeatedly disrupting civilian aviation between 2024 and now, 2026. Baltic and Polish officials have already linked Russia to a documented pattern of arson, cyber attacks, and diversions on rail lines. This warning isn't the opening move, it's a confirmation of a pattern that's already been running. NATO, whether they want to admit it or not, is at war with Russia in the gray zone. There's also a parallel pressure track running at the same time, and it's worth understanding because it's the same doctrine applied differently. On July 22nd, Latvian soldiers used tear gas and fired a warning shot to stop migrants attempting to cross from Belarus. Latvia's prime minister described the situation explicitly as a hybrid threat and confirmed the country has doubled its border guard presence in response. Estonia's own defense reporting has documented more than 30 migrants detained in Tallinn linked to the same Belarus origin pressure campaign, while Estonia separately confirmed it's receiving additional British forces starting in 2027, including drones with ranges up to 250 kilometers. Russia and Mr. Whipple impersonator Lukashenko
Please don't squeeze the Charmin
in Belarus understands something specific about NATO's eastern border. It can be attacked without a single soldier crossing it. Migrants weaponized as pressure, smugglers as cover, disinformation as accelerant, drones as probes, cyber operations as the connective tissue running underneath all of it, and the constant low hum of uncertainty about whether the next incident is the one that finally crosses a line NATO has to respond to. That is the gray zone, and it's specifically designed to be too ambiguous for a clear Article 5 trigger, while still being expensive, exhausting, and genuinely dangerous for the countries absorbing it. Here's the piece that makes Lithuania's response interesting rather than just defensively reactive. On May 13th, roughly 2 months before this infrastructure warning went public, Ukraine and Lithuania signed what's officially called a drone deal, covering defense expertise sharing and defense industry cooperation between the two countries. The Ukrainian government's own readout describes the agreement as opening co-production, technology transfer, and joint manufacturing opportunities between Ukrainian and Lithuanian companies, extending specifically into air and missile defense and unmanned systems. The most operationally significant detail is this: the deal explicitly includes the possible localization of production inside Lithuania for long-range strike, naval, interceptor, and bomber drones, not purchasing finished Ukrainian hardware, building the manufacturing capability on Lithuanian soil, with Ukrainian expertise embedded directly in the process. Now, Lithuania didn't wait for its own infrastructure warning to conclude that drone capability mattered. It had already signed the deal that builds it, months before Nausėda stood in front of cameras and said the words kinetic operations out loud. So here's why Estonia's Narva incident and Lithuania's infrastructure warning are the same doctrine, wearing two different disguises, and understanding that connection is what makes both stories make sense together. Russia calls this Maskirovka. It's not a new invention for this war, it's a military deception doctrine over a century old, and a 1988 Pentagon study on the technique described its purpose like this: to deny information to censors, to sow confusion about what's actually happening in front of you. In 2014, Russia didn't send tanks into Ukraine first. It sent unmarked soldiers into Crimea, seized government buildings, and then Putin stood in front of cameras the next day and denied any Russian soldiers were in the country at all. The uniforms without insignia weren't there to win firefights. They were there to buy time, to delay the moment when Kyiv and then the world could point to a clean act of interstate aggression and respond to it as one. That's the same three-part structure showing up in both Estonia's border incidents and Lithuania's infrastructure warning: plausible deniability, decision lag, and the escalation trap. Deniability because an unmarked soldier or an unexplained substation fire both sit in the legal category between clearly an attack and clearly nothing, and Russia wants to live in that space as long as possible. Decision lag because democracies deliberate, and deliberation is exactly the delay hybrid operations are engineered to exploit. And the escalation trap because Moscow wants to force a binary choice between doing nothing and doing something dramatic, with no comfortable middle option. Estonia's answer removes all three from one specific scenario. You cross the border unmarked, and there's no ambiguity to exploit. There's no decision lag to wait out. No space between criminal and soldier for Russia to hide inside. On a different stretch of the border, Estonia closed a road running through a small pocket of Russian territory after roughly 10 Russian soldiers were spotted standing on it, calling the presence unusual enough to shut the route rather than wait for clarification. Two different incidents, same rhythm. Presence, ambiguity, denial, repeat. Estonia's response to both was to shorten that rhythm before Russia could finish it. Lithuania is applying the same logic to a different attack surface. It can't station a rifle at every substation the way Estonia can post a warning at a border crossing, so instead it's removing the ambiguity in a different way. It's hardening the infrastructure itself and building the detection and response capability, specifically drone and counter-drone systems that make a deniable strike harder to pull off cleanly and harder to hide once it happens. Same doctrine Russia has been running since before either country existed in its current form. Two different NATO states independently deciding the correct response is to refuse Moscow the ambiguity the whole strategy depends on. And here's the strategic logic underneath all of this. Russia wants that ambiguity. That's the entire value of the gray zone. Enough pressure to test resolve and force expensive defensive responses without ever presenting NATO with a clean, unambiguous trigger. It makes collective response automatic and politically simple. A tank column crossing a border is a clear Article 5 case. A substation fire with no confirmed origin is not. NATO's eastern flank has responded by refusing to let that ambiguity work. Estonia removed it entirely from one specific scenario. Little green men that cross the border get shot at. No debate about insignia. And Lithuania has picked its partner correctly. Ukraine isn't a theoretical expert on Russian gray zone tactics. It's the country that's been living inside Russia's actual playbook for over 4 years, adapting in real time. And now it's exporting that adaptation directly into NATO's most exposed border state before Moscow gets to run the same playbook there. So Latvia is absorbing Belarusian migration pressure with doubled border guards and a prime minister who resigned over the last round of drone incidents. Poland is watching the same threat matrix from next door. And Ukraine, after 4 years of fighting exactly this adversary with exactly these tactics, has become the country the entire eastern flank is quietly learning from. Russia wanted ambiguity on its border with NATO. It's instead getting a Baltic state that took the warning seriously enough to start building drones with the one partner who already knows how this particular war actually works. Estonia and Lithuania and Latvia aren't around. Okay, that is it for today, my friends. If this was useful, hit that like button. It really does help push this further out. And feel free to subscribe if I've earned your trust. It is the best free way to support what it is I do here. I cover NATO's eastern flank, Baltic security, and Ukraine's expanding defense partnerships 4 times a week for deeper written analysis. I'm on Medium, and as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.